Advanced model way to explain it, a picture that explains it where that I don't have to spend 20 minutes drawing. So I think it's always the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes. That's
Okay.
the
So,
yeah.
so basically, I'm just taking from the website. This is the idea of translation here,
Mhm.
which was on the website. This is from eventmodeling.org. And this translation is really another view. And I just want to step back and take another way of looking at translation from one level of abstraction to another and see how we deal with it in this context and
Mhm.
how that might or might not apply to what you're saying. So that's really what I'm trying to show.
Sure.
Okay. So let's now zoom out the picture. So what we've got here, right, is this whole thing of there's some detail level of thing, right,
Yeah.
about translate, and obviously there's some stuff missing on this,
Yeah.
this because it's. But the point is, ultimately, we want to know guest left hotel.
Mhm.
There's some information that's going to have to come in, which is if we're going to have to GPS transition, it's like what's the GPS location of the hotel and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. There's
You
a
can see
setup
this,
to it. Yeah.
all that stuff. So that whole level of abstraction, I want to be able to look at that level of abstraction, look at it for completeness, but ultimately, in some view of the model, I want that to just go away,
Yeah.
and I just want to know that guest left hotel, and I want
Yeah.
to be able to pop down and pop out, right?
Yep.
And I want to see that these things across the boundaries, there are events that come out. Like basically, I'm watching for some event. So I'm either pushing the information into that subsystem about the location of the hotel, or I'm outside the subsystem listening to change events. So what's that boundary, right?
Mhm.
And so if we were to deal with that and show a way to draw that and be able to push in and push out of just this example, right?
Yep.
Then what you allow us to do is bubble up levels of abstraction and bubble down.
That's
And
right.
some of the challenge we've been facing with event modeling is kind of what people use, UX people call, and they refer to Apple, Apple user interfaces with the tablets and everything, is flatland, right?
Mhm.
Like you got an iPad tablet and basically all your icons. I'm like, wait a minute, I want these things. Like I can't even organize these things in folders. What the heck, right?
Yeah.
I want to push down and I say I want to have games over here. Like I want to organize these things in logical ways,
Yeah.
right? And I think event modeling kind of almost allows for that, but we don't have a pattern where we really can push down and pop back out. We have to draw
Well,
it flattened out.
yeah. We do. Currently, we do.
And so that's really where this hotel proximity translator example is good because it's very detailed. But if you imagine you did that, then I could take this whole implementation level above it, right? Where
Mhm.
check in, check out, right? And I say,
Yeah.
there are businesses look at kind of roughly, and I'm gonna say roughly because there's three levels of abstraction, right?
Yeah.
There's the strategic level, which we're talking about, right?
That's right.
There's the operational level,
That's right.
and there's the implementation level,
Yep.
how it really works.
Yep.
And mapping those things, this to this to this, we could at least get to the operational level with event modeling and maybe the strategic level. But the point is, you're trying to jump from implementation straight to strategic. At a strategy point of view, really, they might be looking at things differently. My business workflow is I onboard users, they buy stuff, right? And then they offboard them because they're like one-time buyers, right? So that's my business model, right?
Yep.
And those are events. So basically, I'd like to know how many users did we onboard today? Well, wait a minute. How does that map to the system? Well, actually, that's any one of these events that happened, right? If
Yep.
the user finished logging on, paid their credit card, whatever, and then this final event, this event here, if that happens, the user onboarded. Also, if this event happened, either one of those two, we call the user onboarded,
Yep.
right? And right now, I it's hard for me without drawing two different level of models and just put them side by each, right?
Mhm.
And draw arrows, right?
Yep.
That's what I have. I have a completely different model if I just took event model and I say, I'm going to event model, I don't care about implementation. I'm going to event model straight at the operational level. I'm going to say these events, they're logical, but they're what we care about. You need to know these things. And then I can say, I'll draw the implementation, and then I'll draw arrows. These events happen. That means that. And we can start, actually, that would allow me to say, okay, well, wait a minute. If you start, you could do, you can feed those events at the implementation level into an information system that could watch those, roll them up, and actually monitor at a business, how's my business working, right? And then once we have that, we can look at things like these other views, which is strategic. I want to strategically move this whole inventory or a payment or authorization. I want to move that from custom to commodity, right?
Mhm.
That's a whole different aspect to look at, which we can flip the other way. But that's, let me look at these things a little more, right?
Mhm.
Right. So those are different. That's a different abstraction
Yes,
than
it
just
is.
how they map in my business workflow, right?
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think this, if we dealt with this one, we could complement it. If we
Yeah,
found a
I think
pattern
so.
that really works for everyone, we could then complement it to add on what you're talking about here, which is I'm making a strategic play, right? I'm going to push that down and replace that subsystem with a different subsystem,
Yep,
right? That is just a black box for me, right?
that's right.
All I care about is these events.
Mhm.
And so that, I think, if we don't have a pattern for drawing this, we struggle at talking about what you're trying to talk about.
So what's going to help that is the idea of namespaces or tags. So if I have a strategic quote unquote event, or the business at the top level is interested in it, such as this paid in crypto thing, or in your example, hotel guest left, right? Guest left from the hotel, right? That's something that that I want to talk about in my board meeting with the executives about how we make our customers feel really good when they finish their stay. And so that's important to me in that conversation. The longitude latitude events are not important to me in that conversation.
Right.
That's interesting to the developers that need to draw out a square and in coordinates, and anytime there's an event switch from being inside to outside the square, we generate this thing that plus some other things, maybe thresholds, and so if someone's on the edge, it doesn't spam us with these, but whatever. Or maybe it's just a once firing thing. Those are details. So I think what we're looking at, there's two ways to use, we've identified two ways to categorize the swim lanes. For the executive level, these events float into non-service swim lanes. Maybe the related ones will be obviously in the same, side by side, because they're obviously at that level of commoditization or whatever. But it's important to know that we do highlight the the upper two versus the lower two, because really what we're doing is we have costs, direct costs to us in the top upper, right? Thanks for doing that. I can see my stuff floating around. So these two lanes up here, we can see that those are the costly things that we're going to be using, needing to implement, I mean. And down here is stuff we sort of get for free or cheap because we're buying it off the shelf. So that's the view that I want. How we're going to support those two views, I believe, is through tags on events, on services. So if I have a service that the events from which got put here by a by someone, then I know that it is something that we're working on. And in my deeper view, I see these things as supporting things. And let's go. Do you mind if I share, Rick, or do you want to continue?
Yeah,
on
go
this?
ahead, take over.
Okay. Share screen.
Do I have to unshare?
No, I think I can do it.
Okay.
Okay. So perhaps when we look at the original three sort of ways of organizing these swim lanes that we did when we were working with Andreas for some of the stuff. boy, oh boy. It's time to just change all this to a blog post.
If you throw them all into frames, then you can open the frame view and just jump between them.
Right.
It's
Yeah, I
like a
should probably do
PowerPoint.
that. Yeah, there's other problems though with the frames. They just kind of make editing. Anyway, it's a give and take. there's no real way to organize this much better.
Well,
So
stuff you're not editing actively, you just make some frames for it.
yeah. I wish there was a way to just turn them off if you wanted to edit, but whatever. Oh, note, we'll do that ourselves. So business events here are interesting because there's also there's another swim lane I think we can cram in here, which is an optional one, but I think will come up. I'm not sure if it belongs here or not, whether this is the right way to organize it. But if I move this down and here we do this, duplicate it and say graded services are off the shelf components. This is a maybe. So if we have a CRM system, currently we're not integrating with anything. It's an empty one. But we could have customer paid or something as a payment integration event. So what we really have now is this area that we control, but it's made up of business events. And then we have, oh, come on. Potentially, let's just say a worst case scenario. I want to rename this, but for now I'm going to say CRUD events and listener events, etc. Supporting events, integration events. How's that? Does that make sense? Does this one more categorization, that's optional, help us think about this, what's important for certain types of view as we move through our event model? That organizing them on this scale here is helpful for understanding from an architectural perspective. The systems architect can really see where we have trust in a third party, where we have full responsibility ourselves, for where we're talking about the intricacies of either our own or someone else's implementation that doesn't actually deal with the information. And then at the more human level, are anchors to what's actually going on with the human being that's interacting with the system. And of course, our traditional upstairs here is just the all-important UX, UI that we need to always have as an anchor point in our heads as to what is going on with this whole thing underneath. Does that help, Rick?
Maybe. I think you might be conflating a bunch of stuff into the swim lanes.
Like what?
Well, I'm not sure. Like business events, but then each swim lane within business events would actually have separate swim lanes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is an explanation of these. Of all of these swim lanes, right?
So yeah, I can see a way of, you might want to, for any number of reasons, group these two. These three swim lanes belong to something, and that means something to me. And these three swim lanes mean something else. And I think predisposing those, right? But saying these grouping swim lanes and being able to collapse a group or expand a group.
Yes, absolutely.
I think I can use those for whatever I want.
That's right.
I think that's really, I think
This
what you're
is just
saying.
a helpful guide,
And
honestly. Like if you want to arrange your events and add extra
right.
events
And
in there to help you, absolutely go for it.
and
I think
I might want to say, for this conversation, I'm going to group the swim lanes this way.
yeah,
And for another conversation, I'm going to have grouping number 2.
yes,
And that would be, and expand and collapse in a way that would be helpful, because
yeah,
I could say these are the events that matter to the business and these are implementation details. And I'll just group
that's
them.
right.
And like when somebody, yeah, but how does that really work? I could open the implementation details.
That's right. Yeah, just
And
keep
I
drilling
collapse.
down. Yeah,
I
open
really
up
want to
those.
say your business, and then I can start. And then I might say for this conversation, I'm actually going to lay out the logical business workflow and talk about the translation, which I'm going to implement because I'm going to implement monitoring of those business events so we can have a dashboard on how our business works
Yeah,
that's implementation neutral. And say
yeah,
this layer is implementation neutral. These swim lanes have nothing, they have to be mapped to implementation. And I have to have these translation events otherwise. And then I say, now I could look at, if I want to change the implementation, I just need to keep this mapping or
yeah,
make a new map, right? So that's a power. And then that's the same thing as that down at that detail level, I have this subsystem of the GPS, whatever. That's a very low level detail that I only want to open when I'm working on that subsystem. Because
yeah,
honestly, it just works. And I have another team that does it. They're specialized in GPS. Like, I don't need to open the box unless I want to figure out integration problems, right?
yep,
And so that expand and collapse would allow me to do that, because I would collapse all those things, and I would just see when I do collapse them. The question is, what do I want to see, right?
yeah,
At the boundaries, those key events that are coming out and those key events that are going in. So as long as these events go in and these events come out, the thing's going to work, right?
yeah.
So having a way of representing that and saying, what are the key events across the boundaries?
Exactly. And so, I mean, we mark them with the little translation thing that we talked about in the previous session. Which, so we have some guidance to that already. Let's move some of these things over. I just want to make sure we end up at the end of the meetup kind of talking about this, so that this is something that that people have an idea of, for saying, hey, I want this for my boardroom next time we're talking about strategy. I really don't want this free pass for people at the executive level to not be held accountable for their decisions. I think it's certainly hurt a lot of companies. It's certainly hurt the experience of being an employee in one of those companies where there is no accountability. And I want it to be so blatantly obvious that if people at the executive level reject this type of transparency, then it's obvious to the people that know better to if they want to continue working there or not. Because if you're not going to back up why you're doing something, you might be hiding the fact that, hey, you're probably getting some payout and the company's about to be sold or whatever. So, if these things are welcome in a company or they're not, it'll give you an answer as to what kind of company you're working in.
Well,
I mean, I really like that as an idea. You're not so much capturing the why the decisions are being made here, though, right? You're capturing that there's this timeline, and we think these are good things to have done by these points.
Right.
And forgive me, I was late. Maybe you've already talked about this a bit. So, but where does that angle come from in this?
Well, the idea was from if you rewatch the recording of the Wardley Maps series that I have on YouTube, all of that kind of starts there. I think what we're doing here is that we can do better than that. We can start talking about what Rick has always been after, is always, why are we building this damn thing? Is this a problem we should even be looking at? Where does it actually exist in the progression of commoditization of different abilities and different services. So we need something concrete to not just discuss and actually have on a screen, you know, what it is the company's going to be doing, but then to tie those things directly to the work specifications that people are going to follow. And it has to have that drill in, capability that Rick's talking about. I want to collapse this lane right now so that I can see that, you know, I'm not distracted by all that. And so products like Onote, I foresee, you know, you shrink that swim lane, collapse it, any event that's in that swim lane that's attached to a part of the workflow. Horizontally, it also shrinks because you're no longer explaining those events in that swim lane. So anything to do with that swim lane on the UI part or any other swim lane automatically also collapses horizontally. And all the way up until you collapse everything about implementation, and you're left at this top level here, where the swim lanes rearrange themselves to talk about Genesis custom product commodity, where you can, and also brings in from left and right the history and the prediction of the future on the other side, so that you can see where your where your company actually is with respect to the market, and that the roadmaps align to what you can depend on later. So for example, a good discussion for this would be, well, if I build this wallet thing for enterprise, I'm betting that in 2 years, some places like Walmart will have that API for us to do that. And we're ready at the table with an integration story for them, and we have a really large customer. That's a kind of strategic discussion that we want to have when we're talking about where we want to take the company in the next 5 years, 2 years, 10 years, probably not 10 years these days, but at least a couple of years or 5 years, and what our offering is. If, you know, a lot of this you know, CEO level, you know, leadership talk is like, what's our big audacious goal? And, you know, I was working at Active State, and they had this Sully from Monsters Inc., a big stuffed one that was in the corner of the office, always reminding us of what our big audacious goal was. And in that case, it was basically bringing cloud virtualization onto a developer's desktop, right? To be able to develop something without needing to spin up 10 different VMs and pay for that. And the bet was that Docker was going to be mature enough by the time that we did it. And it was a 15-year-old kid or a 16-year-old kid that was basically moving all the VM implementations of Cloud Foundry in order, instead of working on virtual machines in the cloud, he changed them to work on Docker containers on one machine. And so sometimes we needed, like, you know, a giant amount of processing to simulate a Cloud Foundry. Now you had this Staccato product that you could do on Docker containers on your laptop and test the whole thing out because the footprint was so much smaller. So that was the big audacious goal. And how I would paint that with this event model was that, you know, instead of this digital currency here, I would have Docker containers are a product, whereas they're more of a commodity today. You know, here's a way that we can develop something that's sitting at where, you know, VMs are actually here as a commodity, but Docker isn't. And we're going to place ourselves right here on that adoption curve and take this giant open source Cloud Foundry project and move it onto containers. That's a lot of work. Yep. But I know there's a lot of money behind it because we can migrate way more companies from their on-premise into the cloud if we have lighter tooling. And that was their bet. And then they sold to HP for like 50 mil or something. I forget what the price was. I don't think it was disclosed. That's my guess. So anyway, yeah, I wish, you know, I wish I had that at, you know, for myself during that time. I wish I came up with this sooner because, you know, 6 years ago, that would have been really cool to talk about, you know, why we're doing some of these things, you know, day to day at Active State versus what could we leave off. We were kind of doing these things. I just never thought, I never had the concept communicated clearly to me when I was working there. But if someone had showed me something like this when I started working there, we're like, okay, cool, I know what's going on. You know, it's easily summed up about Docker containers instead of VMs, but then there's all the support that needs to go underneath, and you could have this map of, you know, what belongs to what and what supports what to give a breakdown of the components and the work that had to be done.
Adam, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about based on what you just said, and John, this is in support of your thing. And so interrupt me if you've got it already. I'm trying to understand which of these events would tell you why Docker containers versus Rocket containers or whatever it was at the time, right?
Exactly.
How do we look at this? And, you know, because corporate accountability is one thing, but maybe they made the wrong choice for the right reason. You know what I mean? And how do we incorporate that into this too? Is that
that's perfect. Again, we have to go back what the goals are for the strategic kind of tools like this Wordly map. The real focus of those tools is to have a talking point, and things like Wordly maps are really open-ended. You can do whatever you want in there as long as you have this commodity value type of axes, right? They said that the top, the axis, the y-axis on the Wordly map is not really that important. It's kind of like a dependency walk, which is meh. It's some of that is really self-evident, and
I think the y-axis is more than a dependency walk. If you take a look at it, the key is it's a visibility. It's a customer visibility. If you're changing something,
it is. But I've seen it argued in Wordly maps for different reasons, and a lot of people say that it's not as important to them. So, okay, maybe they have a different take on it than you.
I mean, I think a lot of people who are just implementation focused, like if I'm just using this for IT implementation and I don't care about the customer, then that's not as valuable to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think a lot of people who jump to Wordly maps are really just trying to do IT changes, and they are the customer, so everything's visible to them, and they don't get value from it. Well, that doesn't make it less valuable if you're a strategic level. Right?
Well, anyway, so just to get back to Jonathan's question, this is supposed to be a canvas for those discussions. So during that time, if I want to switch context, this is going to be a really confusing thing for someone coming in here later. But let's just do your example here, and when we have, maybe we show. Docker, and maybe here we have Rocket containers or jails and whatever, right? Is that what it is? Is Docker the jails equivalent? I forget.
I think jails was the BSD.
Yes, it's the BSD thing.
So yeah.
But while you're typing, I'd like to make an observation at Wordly maps, which is I don't feel they provide me with a very compelling way of visualizing how to evaluate the difference between multiple moves and what's being done in them, despite Simon Wardley barking to the contrary.
Well, the thing is, that's the same thing with me. I had a problem with it. It's like, why am I gluing this to the beginning of event modeling? It's still got some arbitrary things in there. I really don't have a way to say clearly when things happen, those red arrows of like when I'm moving something to be, this is going to be internal for us, but if we're successful, this is something going to float as a product and maybe get money from integrations via this service or whatever. I don't have, I mean, again, all you need is a napkin to have a conversation, so you can scribble whatever you want. But then you start to get value by having some constructs, and for that actually to lead into how you're going to implement, and so that if you made some assumption, it's tested. And I think in this way, by gluing something to a Docker container, and let's say Docker was still here as not a commodity, but Rocket was already a commodity, right? And we want to be on the path because maybe Docker has a bigger company with more funding, and we kind of see this as a switch in the market that's going to happen. Then, we want to ride, this switch here in terms of what we offer, and we'll be in a better spot after we're in business for a while. So, this is this is kind of how I would have it. Jonathan, does that kind of answer your question as to how I would kind of look at two different possibilities for technologies if we're in a strategic kind of meeting?
I don't know. I mean, maybe. John, are you? I'm also not the best person. Like I'm like 80% here, but I've still got the baby. So
right, okay. We should put the baby on here.
Yeah.
Raising a baby. You probably make a event model for your baby as to when they go to.
I was actually thinking about legitimate like a life map. But anyway, anyways, sorry.
That is kind of cool. Yeah.
What are you thinking?
Adam, what's not clearly explained, there's probably a missing line or circle or something, is my intention is to move. Currently, I'm using Rocket, and my intention is to move from Rocket to Docker. That thing you just had drawn. Like, don't delete it. You just had it there on the screen.
Okay, I'm gonna Control Z.
Okay, so there is.
Honestly,
my intention. You're basically I highlight this strategic hit. Currently, we're implementation using Rocket, and it's a commodity, great. But Docker, we need to move to ride this wave to Docker. So draw that.
Okay, so 2020 to 2021, we have 2 events.
Well, so not only draw it, and while you're attempting to draw it, the question is, what value do you hypothesize is going to be derived from this?
Mm-hmm.
That's the key question behind us. Yeah. And then the question with Jonathan was like, then how do you negotiate between the different strategies and compare this, right? And I'm not expecting to solve that. The point I wanted to make is I've been sat here for months thinking about this problem and I haven't figured out a way of representing it.
Hold on, let me just get that from you again, because I'm just in the middle of showing the example. I'm trying to do 2 things at once. Sorry.
Yeah, no, dude, it's really like harsh. Type and think.
I can only do so much at once. Hold on. If we just move that other stuff out of the way. And we might actually flag something as Does that make sense? From the business perspective, we have 3 large things. Currently, we're doing this. It's implemented. If we drill in, we see our system working like this already. Now we need to do these 2 things.
Well, I see a bunch of events.
Well, first of all, here.
I don't see us saying we are switching from these events to these events. That's what I don't see on that diagram.
Here you go. Oh, shoot. 1 second. This is your switch. Just paints the picture perfectly.
I'm thinking Bob Ross at this point.
What's that? Sorry, I have a
happy little trees.
There you go. Does that help?
Well, how do you represent intention on this versus event?
Yes.
I think maybe is the. Is that